sometimes the most efficient solution can remove the very thing that makes that business unique. As integrators, one of our greatest strengths is our ability to see opportunities for improvement. We walk into a business and we can immediately notice bottlenecks, inefficiencies, things that could be automated, delegated, streamlined, or even organized better. It's just how our brain works, right? And we have this giant toolbox of skills and resources. And because of that, it's easy to immediately start looking for ways to optimize everything. But over the years, one thing that I have realized is that one of the most important skills an integrator can develop isn't efficiency, it's discernment. Because the goal isn't to build the most efficient business. The goal is actually to build the right business for that visionary. And those are not always the same thing. Because discernment is what separates an integrator from that task doer. Now, one of the things that makes a great integrator is the ability to understand which tools to use, when to use them, and sometimes even when not to use them. Because just because something can be automated doesn't mean it should be. Just because something can be delegated doesn't mean it should be. Just because something can be streamlined doesn't mean it's aligned. Now, discernment is that ability to look beyond the process itself and understand that bigger picture. What is that person trying to build? How do they like to work? What do they value? What kind of experience are they trying to create for their clients? Because every recommendation we make should support the answers to those questions. And I think this is where a lot of service providers unintentionally get stuck. We become so focused on fixing problems that we forget to understand the person behind the business. And instead, we can jump straight into solutions. We start thinking about software, about workflows, about automation, about efficiency. But before any of that, we really need to understand the visionary. So understanding the visionary should come first. How do they communicate? How do they make decisions? What matters to them? How involved do they want to be in the business? What kind of relationships do they want with their clients? If we don't understand these things, we can end up building systems that technically work, but don't actually support the person using them. And that's where friction can start to show up. And on paper, the system looks fantastic, right? The workflow is efficient, the automation works perfectly, but maybe the visionary avoids using it because it's not tailored to them. Or they're working around it. Or it creates this resistance that they can't quite explain. And often that's because the solution was built around efficiency instead of alignment. And again, that's where that discernment comes in. So I want to share a real example with you guys. One of the clients that I've been working with, part of her process involves sitting down in person with clients and walking through her process together. She takes time to explain the vision, answer questions, and guide them through each step. Now, from an operational perspective, there are a lot of ways we could make that process more efficient. We could automate approvals of things. We could send information digitally. We could reduce the amount of meeting time. We could create workflows that eliminate some of these conversations. And if all we cared about was efficiency, those changes might make sense. But here's what I realized. Those meetings aren't actually a bottleneck. They're part of the product. They're part of the experience. They're part of the value. The relationship building, the guidance, that personal attention, that one-on-one high-touch experience, that is exactly what this visionary wants her clients to experience. So while automation might be the most efficient solution, it's not actually the right solution in this case. Because doing that would remove part of what makes her service special. And I think that's something that we really do need to remember as integrators, OBMs, project managers, and those behind the scene leaders. Sometimes the most efficient solution can remove the very thing that makes that business unique. So that brings me back to not everything needs to be optimized. Because again, we have to be careful not to become so focused on optimization that we start optimizing away the things that matter. Not every manual process is a problem. Not every meeting is unnecessary. Not every task needs to be delegated. Sometimes those things exist because they support the vision. And our role is to understand the difference. We're not here to build the business we would build. We're here to support the business they want to build. That distinction is really incredibly important. Because the longer you work with clients, the more you'll realize that success doesn't always look the same. Some people do want highly automated businesses. Some people want deep client relationships. Some people want to scale. Some people want simplicity. Some people want a lean team. Others want a collaborative environment. And none of these things are wrong or right. And it's our job to support the vision that's actually being created. So we want to essentially meet the visionary where they are at. Now, I've seen this come up a lot recently too with my short-term projects that I've been doing. So I've been doing a lot of short-term retainers, done a VIP day. And many of these business owners don't necessarily need a long-term integrator yet. They simply just need someone to come in, help reduce the overwhelm, put a few foundational pieces into place, and then help them move forward. And then eventually they'll be ready to bring on an integrator. But right now they just need some help to reduce that overwhelm, right? Because they're carrying a lot. They're overwhelmed, they're stuck, they're trying to manage 100 different things at once. And in those situations, this is where discernment becomes even more important. Because I have to ask myself, what do they actually need right now? What is the next best step? And how much information should I actually give them? Because if we give them too much, that's not going to help their overwhelm. Also, I can come in and I can see their inbox is crazy. Maybe their drive is also unorganized, but maybe that doesn't necessarily mean we need to do those things right away. Because we also want to be thinking about how much change can they realistically implement. Just because I can build a complicated system doesn't mean that I should, right? I'm all about simplicity here, if you haven't noticed. And sometimes the most strategic thing that I can do is create the simplest possible solution that they'll actually use. Because the goal isn't to impress them with complexity. Instead, the goal is to create clarity and momentum. And it's an important reminder for anyone listening who works behind the scenes. We don't need more complexity. Instead, we need clarity, direction, support. And often the most valuable thing we can provide isn't a bigger solution. It's actually a more simpler one. And sometimes people just need an outside force to come in and tell them they're actually doing well. They're doing the thing. Because so many business owners come to me and they feel like they're a hot mess. They're not successful. They don't have systems, when actually they do have a lot of things in place and they just can't recognize it because, of course, it's, as an entrepreneur, mindset work is important. So sometimes it takes me coming in and being like, no, actually you have some good systems in place. Now let's just reduce some overwhelm, take things off your plate, maybe implement one simple solution. Right? And as an integrator, sometimes it can feel like we're not doing enough because we have a full tool belt of skills. But we don't want to do that. We don't want to overwhelm them. We don't need to use everything. We just need to know what the next best step is. And that is where discernment comes in. And that is the difference between a general virtual assistant and a strategic partner. So again, this is where the difference becomes really clear, because a VA might ask, what would you like me to do? Where an integrator goes, what is the best solution for this person, this business, and this vision? A VA will complete a task. An integrator provides leadership. A VA executes, but an integrator exercises discernment. And to be clear, this isn't about one role being better than the other. This is not what this is at all, because both roles are very valuable, but they're different. Clients hire strategic partners because they want someone who can help them make decisions. Someone who can simplify what feels overwhelming, someone who can identify the next best step, someone who can build solutions that actually fit the business that they're creating. That's that leadership. And leadership often requires us to slow down long enough to understand what's truly needed before jumping into action. So the longer I do this work, the more I realize that our job isn't to create perfect systems. Our job is to create aligned systems. Systems that support the visionary, that support the client experience, that support the bigger vision they're trying to bring to life. Because at the end of the day, the right solution is not always the most efficient one. Sometimes it's the one that's most aligned, and that takes discernment. Now, before I wrap up, I want to leave you with one question to think about, and that's, can you think of a time when the most efficient solution wasn't actually the best solution for a client? And what helped you recognize that difference? I'd love for you to reflect on that this week. Now, if today's conversation resonated with you and you're realizing that being an integrator is about far more than systems, automation, and task management, I would love to invite you to explore my Molly Morris Integrators certification program. Because inside this program, that's where you learn how to become that true strategic partner. Someone who can exercise discernment, provide leadership behind the scenes, and build solutions that align with the visionary's goals, values, and client experience. Because the most valuable integrators aren't the ones who know the most. They're the ones who know how to think strategically. So if you're interested to learn more, you can visit mollymorris.com/certification, or you can go to the link in the show notes. I will see you next time.